I found out my daughter wasn't mine because of a school blood test, and at first I thought it had to be a mistake. It sounds ridiculous even now, because for 10 years nothing ever felt wrong, not even for a second. I was there the day she was born, I cut the cord, I held her before anyone else did, and from that moment she was just mine. Her name is Liza, and she used to fall asleep on my chest every evening while I watched TV, and I'd stay still for hours because I didn't want to wake her. My wife, Oksana, and I had her after 3 years of trying, so when it finally happened, it felt like everything in life had finally lined up the way it was supposed to. We weren't perfect, we argued sometimes like everyone does, but nothing serious, nothing that ever made me question our life. Liza grew up fast, and by the time she turned 10, she was this curious, talkative kid who asked a million questions about everything. One day she came home from school holding a paper and said they were doing a biology project about blood types, and every student needed to bring information about their parents' blood groups. I didn't think twice about it. I knew mine was type A, and I was pretty sure Oksana's was also A, because I remembered it from when she gave birth. So we filled out the form together at the kitchen table, just a normal evening, nothing special. A couple of days later, her teacher called. At first it sounded like a routine thing, just polite and calm, asking if I could come by the school for a quick conversation. I even joked with Liza that maybe she got into trouble for talking too much in class, and she rolled her eyes like she always did. But when I got there, the teacher didn't smile the way she usually did. She sat me down and showed me Liza's test results, and then she pointed at the chart. Liza's blood type was B. I remember just staring at the paper, not understanding why she was making a big deal out of it, and then she explained, very carefully, that if both parents are type A, it's not possible for the child to have type B. I laughed, actually laughed, because it sounded like one of those textbook oversimplifications, like something that works in theory but not always in real life. I said maybe the school test was wrong, or maybe they mixed up samples. She nodded, like she expected that reaction, and said that could happen, but she suggested we double-check with a proper lab test just to be sure. I walked out of the school still not worried, just slightly annoyed that I had to deal with something so trivial. On the way home I even stopped by a store and bought Liza her favorite chocolate, because I didn't want her to think she was in trouble for anything. That evening, I told Oksana about it while we were having dinner. For a split second, something in her expression changed. It was so quick I almost missed it, like a flicker, like when someone hears something they weren't expecting. But then she immediately shrugged it off and said it was probably a mistake, just like I thought. And that should have been the end of it. But for some reason, I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was the way the teacher spoke, or maybe it was that tiny moment at the table when Oksana hesitated, but the thought stayed in the back of my mind. Not loud, not clear, just there. So the next day, I went to a private clinic and scheduled a proper blood test for all three of us. Oksana didn't argue, which I found strange, because normally she would say it's unnecessary or a waste of money. This time she just said, okay, and that was it. We went together 2 days later. Liza was excited, treating it like some kind of adventure, asking the nurse questions and trying to be brave when they took her blood. I kept smiling at her, telling her she was doing great, while inside I felt this weird tension building up, something I couldn't explain. The results were ready the next day. I went to pick them up alone, because Oksana said she had work and couldn't leave early. Again, not unusual, but still, something about it felt off. I remember sitting in my car outside the clinic, holding the envelope, staring at it for a full minute before opening it. And when I finally did, the first thing I saw was my name, then Liza's, and then the numbers. My blood type, A. Liza's blood type, B. And at the bottom, a note confirming biological incompatibility between father and child. I read that line 3 times. Then I read it again. And that's when the thought that I had been pushing away finally became real. Because if she wasn't biologically mine, then whose child had I been raising for 10 years? I didn't drive home right away after reading the results, because I knew that once I walked through that door, everything would change, and there would be no way to go back to how things were before. But at the same time, I couldn't sit in the car forever, so after maybe 20 minutes, I started the engine and went home. Oksana was already there, standing in the kitchen like she had been waiting for me. Liza was in her room doing homework, humming something to herself, completely unaware of anything. I didn't say hello, I didn't take off my jacket, I just put the envelope on the table and asked her to explain it. She didn't even pretend to look surprised. She looked at the paper, then at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything, and the silence felt heavier than any argument we ever had. Then she sat down slowly and said, "I was going to tell you." I remember laughing again, but this time it didn't sound like a joke at all. 10 years? I said. You were going to tell me after 10 years? She started talking quickly, like she had rehearsed it in her head 100 times. She said that before we got married, we had a rough period, and we were on a break for a few weeks. During that time, she met someone else, and it was a mistake, something that meant nothing to her, something she regretted immediately. Then we got back together, and not long after that, she found out she was pregnant. She said she genuinely believed the baby was mine, because the timing was close, and she chose to believe that version because it was easier, because she wanted our life to work. I stood there listening, trying to process what she was saying, but all I could think about was Liza in the other room, sitting at her desk, probably drawing something or writing in her notebook. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "He doesn't know," she said finally. "I never told him. We don't even talk anymore." I felt this wave of anger rise up, but it wasn't loud or explosive, it was cold and steady. "So you just decided for everyone," I said. "For me, for him, for her." She started crying then, saying she was scared, that she didn't want to lose me, that she loved me, that she thought the truth would only destroy everything. And the worst part was, she was right. Because in that moment, everything we had built together felt like it was cracking, piece by piece. But then I heard Liza's voice from the hallway. "Dad? Are you home?" And just like that, everything became very simple. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway, and she ran up to me like she always did, smiling, holding her notebook, ready to show me something she had drawn. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second my mind tried to find differences, to see her as someone else's child. But I couldn't. All I saw was my daughter. The one I taught to ride a bike, the one I helped with homework, the one who called me Dad every single day for 10 years. She handed me the notebook and said, "Look, I drew us." There were 3 stick figures, holding hands. Me, her, and Oksana. I swallowed hard and forced a smile, telling her it looked great, asking her about the drawing like nothing had happened. That evening, after she went to bed, Oksana and I sat down again. This time, the conversation was quieter. I asked practical questions, the kind you ask when you're trying to rebuild some kind of order from chaos. We agreed that Liza wouldn't find out, at least not now. She was too young, and there was no reason to hurt her with something she couldn't understand. I also told Oksana that I needed time, that I couldn't just pretend everything was fine after what I learned. She nodded, not arguing, not asking for anything. Over the next few weeks, things were tense but calm. We functioned, we talked when necessary, we took care of Liza together, but something between us had changed permanently. At one point, I considered finding the biological father, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. He didn't know, he wasn't part of her life, and bringing him in would only complicate things even more. So I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not something I announced out loud, just something I settled into quietly. I would stay. Not for Oksana, not for appearances, but for Liza. Because regardless of what the test said, I was the one who raised her, and she was the one who ran to me every day after school, the one who trusted me, the one who saw me as her father. A month later, there was a school event, a small presentation where kids showed their projects to parents. Liza stood on a little stage, holding a poster about blood types, explaining it in her own words, a bit nervous but proud. At one point, she looked into the crowd, found me, and smiled. After it was over, she ran up to me again, asking if she did well. I nodded and said, "Of course you did." Then she hugged me tightly and said, "I'm glad you're my dad." And I hugged her back, just as tight, and said, "Me too."